Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Jeremy Smith and Peter Rutzler. After gorging on European football midweek, Ligue was a little bit of a light bite this weekend with just 15 goals from all of the 10 games. Somehow we'll make a show out of all that action, but we'll have your questions at the end as well after the latest headlines. Bordeaux started this weekend off with a bang, winning Friday's fixture away to Toulouse 1-0, thanks to Malcolm's third goal of the season. On Saturday, Monaco returned to winning ways with a 3-0 win over Strasbourg, with a double coming from Ligue 1's top scorer, Radamel Falcao. Saint-Etienne squeezed past Dijon with a 1-0 victory after being awarded a somewhat questionable penalty, while Nantes won for the third time in 4 games with the exact same scoreline of 1-0, this time dispatching Caen. The single-goal scoreboard trend continued throughout the multiplex on Saturday, with Guingamp snatching a win in added time at home to Lille, and Pedro Mendes's header saw Montpellier overcome Troyes. Marseille have 2-goal hero Clinton Ng to thank as the Cameroon international helped them halt their slide with a 2-0 victory in Amiens. While Metz finally got off the mark, as did new striker Nolan Roux, as they took all 3 points from the Stade Raymond Copart against Angers, while Mario Balotelli scored his third goal in 2 games to help Nice beat Rennes. In Sunday's late match, 2 own goals handed Paris Saint-Germain a 2-0 win over Lyon at the Parc des Princes, with an early penalty shout for the visitors turned away in a very competitive display. And that's all for your news. But remember, to keep up to date with everything French football news related, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with Sunday night's encounter between Paris Saint-Germain and Lyon. Some called it the Kangaroo Derby, but we'll leave that to them. Many saw this as the title favourites' first big test, and 2 own goals helped them inch past the post. But Jez, don't they always say that the best teams in leagues win even when they don't play well?
Yeah, I think that's probably... it's become a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. It does often seem to be the case, and Sunday was a perfect example. PSG were certainly not at their best. Lyon were excellent. I think probably the certainly the best they played this season, I'd say. But PSG came out on top. I think a mixture of, as you said, a dodgy referee call early in the match, bad luck on Lyon's part, hitting the crossbar with a fantastic shot, with Bariola well beaten, and very good luck on PSG's part with a couple of own goals.
So let's talk about PSG's performance really first, Peter, and it was kind of middling. We saw the 4-2-3-1 formation that we've seen against Metz the other week as well. What did you think to their overall performance? Were they maybe, after a bit of a free-flowing motion from their attacking players, this one a bit of a weaker, maybe more confused performance?
Yeah, I would go along that lines, I think. Perhaps not confused. It felt a little bit like they're a little bit unfamiliar. It was a bit stifled. I think one of the big debates that's been had about PSG since they brought in the big names in Neymar and Mbappe is where they're all going to fit in. And we saw at the start in Mbappe's first display, he was sort of playing behind Cavani, but now we're looking at with Draxler in the middle and then Mbappe played on the right, just as Didier Deschamps did for France. And it doesn't look like at the moment that that's really getting the best out of him. I also seems a bit like Neymar. His peak, his bright start has sort of dimmed a little bit since Mbappe's arrival. It's almost as though there's another star on the side, and it's bringing him down not quite a notch. You see the fancy touches and whatever else, but it seems a bit like they're a little bit more stifled. It was like with Metz. I mean, the final score 5-1 was not a reflection of the game, as you guys were talking about last week. And it was only after the red card that they went on and tore them apart. And this week they weren't going to get that against a very well organised Lyon side. They knew their roles very, very well. They shut down the wide areas as well as centrally. Draxler was very much a passenger. He was unable to get involved in the game. He found himself dropping quite deep to get on the ball. And I think, yeah, it was a little bit a case of being stifled. And I mean, as you said it at the start of the pod, the best teams win, even when they're not playing well. So that's definitely something for them to take. But I do feel like there was a sense of perhaps unfamiliarity. We've got a lot of big new names coming in. But yeah, on the whole, I feel there was a little bit of disjointedness. And I think really they were missing Verratti. I mean, the fluidity that they had against Celtic midweek came a lot through him. And when a game is as tight as it was against Lyon, they've compacted the space. You need to stretch teams, and they've got the arsenal to do that. Mbappe is definitely one of the best players around to be stretching teams. And Neymar can do that as well. So without Verratti's his vision, his length of pass, I think they struggled a little bit. And I think if you put Verratti in for Draxler in that game, perhaps you have a different result. But yeah, it was a bit stifled, I felt. But I think a lot of credit must go to Lyon as well for how well they did. And they're unlucky. They felt very unlucky.
Let's focus in on the German's performance, Jez. And he looked a little bit lost, really. There is an argument that Peter's made excellently that if Verratti wasn't suspended, he would probably be in there. You've also got to take into account that Pastore wasn't available as well. But are they trying to sort of shoehorn him in, being that expensive player that they've bought recently that they need to try and give game time to?
That was the first. This was the first match where I felt maybe that was the case. I mean, if all the rumours are true, they would have been happy to have sold him if they'd got the right price in the summer. But I just with all the players that were out, there was Verratti and Pastore, as you said, Di Maria as well. I'm not sure that Emery got his tactics right. I think he should have stuck with the 4-3-3. And I mean, personally, I'd have gone with Lo Celso in there as a sort of spearhead of the three in the absence of Verratti and Pastore. And I mean, arguably, the fact that he came on and sort of won the game with his move for the first own goal kind of maybe backs that up a little bit. But I think the problem with the midfield was not only that Draxler was a bit of a passenger, but also the kind of player he is. He wasn't giving any support to Motta and Rabiot. Motta, as you all know, is sort of aging. He's not going to be performing well week in, week out, especially having played in midweek as well. And Rabiot, I'm really not sure Emery did him a favour. I mean, he clearly wasn't fit, had to have pain-killing injections beforehand, and ended up, I mean, it felt like at times he was sort of manning the PSG midfield by himself, which they got away with it on Sunday. But at some point, if they're continuing to play him when he's injured, they're risking him either getting a serious injury or at best kind of burning out early in the season, which isn't a good thing considering obviously the bigger targets that they've got to come later next year. So yeah, I think Emery maybe missed a trick there, and possibly it is in an attempt to keep Draxler happy. Presumably, if Draxler knew that they were trying to get rid in the summer, then they've sort of got some brownie points to make up with him. But I think he's generally more effective coming in from the wing, and yeah, certainly he didn't seem up to kind of running the game from that central position on Sunday.
Yeah, and it also makes you think if Rabiot was in that scenario, why they didn't try someone like Christopher Nkunku, who had good moments last season, and I think he's a decent player. And when you've got rid of Blaise Matuidi, you maybe need to use that depth a little bit more in these kind of games. Although you can argue that Lyon's a tough game and they've got a midweek off, which will help them recover a little bit. But Jez touched on him briefly there, Peter, and I did want to talk about Giovanni Lo Celso, who's maybe been lost in the shuffle of the amount of attacking talent they have brought in, and others big names that they've talked about. But he's a very talented young lad who they brought back in January, and they've shown him in glimpses. And this was maybe the first time we've seen him really affect a game so brilliantly as he did against Kenny Tete, who had kept Neymar in check throughout the first half at least.
Yeah, I mean, he did. He made an instant impact. It was a great turn. He sold Kenny Tete down down the river. But I do feel like he's a great option for Emery to have, and it's good to see that he's keeping him in touch with the first team, and he's using him, and he is capable of making the step up for more regular game time. I feel his impact against Lyon was down potentially to fatigue. Lyon, of course, played midweek. Kenny Tete, as we were just saying, he's been up against Neymar all evening. He switched off. Celso sold him, and Cavani deflects it in off Marcelo. So yeah, I think Lo Celso is a great option. I think it was described as a joker in the pack by one outlet. So I think that's a nice way of describing him. He's definitely a different option. He seemed much more comfortable in the middle. His movement was more investigative. He's clearly technically proficient, and he's a good option for them to have. So, yeah, I hope we see more of him, really. And he isn't cut out completely. It's hard to see how he's going to get as much game time with the big names. They've got to come back. But as long as he's on the books, longer term potentially for PSG could be an option. But for now, I mean, with the squad congestion, it's difficult to see where he gets those opportunities.
I think I definitely, with everyone fit, I would say certainly doesn't get near the starting berth. But I think he's a perfect replacement for Pastore if his injury problems continue. Problem is, Pastore also wasn't necessarily a definite starter. I agree that sort of at the moment he looks more as a kind of impact player, but that might just be because he hasn't had the chance to start a game and show what he can do throughout. But yeah, certainly, at the end of last year, the flashes he showed against Saint-Etienne and Bastia were fantastic, and I just think possibly in a match against Lyon, which is always going to be sort of relatively frenetic, PSG might have sort of benefited from someone like him who's able to just keep his foot on the ball. I mean, obviously Neymar can with his dribbling skills, but he plays at a much faster pace. I don't think it would have been such a bad thing to have Lo Celso as a kind of foil, just slowing things down, maybe.
Yeah.
Giving Rabiot a breather.
Yeah, and looking at this side, really, you look at the likes of Lucas as well and Di Maria, because he can play on those wider positions, and I include Draxler and Pastore in that, where they're very, very good players, but they're all probably looking at that exit door. Is Lo Celso maybe that one because he's younger? He's obviously a little bit. He doesn't really have the experience of European football really yet. Maybe he's a great player for them to push forward as their next player to really have an impact off the bench, and then maybe in a couple of years, we say Cavani maybe in his early to mid 30s. Maybe he gets moved on. Maybe Mbappe moves in the middle, and maybe there's a spot there for Lo Celso to slot into. That's obviously denying that PSG maybe look to try and buy someone else as they tend to do. But if you were at least future planning, it might be something for them to consider. But before we talk about Lyon, I do want to mention a couple of things that have surrounded PSG over the last day or so as well. And the first one comes from that game, actually, and it was a strange moment between Neymar and Cavani for the penalty the Uruguayan went on to miss. It was strange, Jez, it was a bit of the Brazilian contingent with Dani Alves taking the ball, passing it to Neymar. Him and the Uruguayan had a bit of a squabble about taking the penalties, because it looks like Cavani's the usual penalty taker, and he has taken all their penalties, but Neymar is the pseudo-new face of Paris Saint-Germain. What do you think to this whole scenario? Is it just one of those things, or is it maybe a worrying trend that the player power, especially in PSG, might be overbearing on some of them, and on Unai Emery, who has said that the players need to sort it out themselves?
I think it's one to keep an eye on. I mean, it could be one of those things that blows over, but I do get the sense that it could be something more than that, especially when you look at it in terms of passes during the match. There's all these stats that have come out today saying how many that between Neymar and Mbappe, there's loads of passes to each other, and both of them have practically cut Cavani out of the equation. I think he received 2 passes altogether from the 2 of them during the match. I think, again, when they're beating Celtic 5-0 and they're putting 5 past Metz, it's easy to, everyone's happy, everyone's getting their share of the goals. There's no problem, but the fact is that there are some very big egos there, which isn't a criticism. I think to get to the top of the world game like that, you have to have big egos. But I think there is the potential for clashes. There seems to be the potential for cliques, with Cavani seemingly a little bit isolated. I think Mbappe is probably a little bit starstruck in terms of Neymar at the moment. And, Neymar is the big name. What he says goes. I wouldn't be surprised if suddenly he's the one taking on penalty duties, whatever Emery says in the press.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine this in the Ibrahimovic era, really. I think the Swede would have headbutted both the Brazilians if they were doing that to him. I don't think that would not have gone down well with him. Let's talk about the other one, really, Peter, and that's involving Layvin Kurzawa, who's had a poor start to the season. He come off on this one as well for Yuri to replace him. But there's reports of him being blackmailed for a video. I don't want to say similar to Aurier because it's a little bit unfair, because Aurier's was certainly more foul-mouth laden than Kurzawa's is reportedly being, where he maybe diminishes Deschamps, the French team manager, but he did ring him about this incident, warning him if it did come out, which at least puts a little bit of a positive spin on it. But it's another sign of immaturity from this young footballer, isn't it?
Yeah, we were talking before we came on air about how he's not exactly in a position to be bad-mouthing the French coach after his recent performances. Yeah, it's another example of immaturity. There was the example, of course, when he was it dabbing against for the under-21s?
That's what he used to call it, yes.
Yeah. And it's these kind of things that they mount up, and obviously for Aurier, he's got a second chance with Spurs. I mean, I don't think it was as bad as that, and he's done the right thing by contacting Deschamps before. Obviously, not gone into paying anything like this. So, I mean, in terms of how he's dealt with it quite well. So we have to give him credit for that. But he's got to be more careful than finding himself in a shisha bar, bad mouthing the French national coach when his position is very much under fire at the moment.
Absolutely. And if you ever see Kurzawa, it is your duty to dab at him, because it is one of the funniest football moments in history. You have to do it. He deserves every moment of that. Let's move on to Lyon really now, because they were excellent last night. And I did say on the preview show, I was worried they might be a bit more negative. They might try and pull out one of those front four, Jez, that have been so exciting at times, at least this season, to try and be a little bit more solid. But they were really dynamic and excellent, and a couple of chances here and there, a couple of moments where maybe something goes their way a little bit better, especially that penalty early on, at least anyway. And this could have been a completely different game.
I think Marseille got a hell of a lot of stick when they lost to Monaco 6-1 the other day, not just because of the score, but because they blatantly set out for a 0-0. And there were a lot of Marseille fans who are kind of like, we're Marseille, we don't do that kind of thing. We're a big club. It's embarrassing that we're sort of making ourselves look small compared to these upstarts. And I think there was an element of that with Lyon, that that they're not for them to sort of park the bus right from the start. The thing is that the way they've been playing up till now, beforehand, you just said, well, that it's suicide to open up and try to take PSG on at their own game. But they were fantastic. I think up till now they've looked like a lot of individual parts trying to play as a team. There's obviously a lot of newcomers, a big turnover from last year, and it's always going to take a while for players to get used to playing with each other. But this is the first time they really looked, all sort of singing from the same hymn sheet, and it was excellent to see. Instead of, there's been a couple of times this season where it's felt a little bit like a bit of skill from Fekir has kind of hidden some collective blushes, but this time everyone performed well, and I was particularly impressed with the defence. And again, on paper it looks a bit silly to say so considering they were 2 own goals, but they really were both bad luck. But I thought that the back five, Lopez had a great game, but I thought the back four also looked good. Morello, Marcelo in the middle, but especially Mendy and Tete at fullback. They're sort of the younger models of Rafael and Marcel, but I thought they came out a lot better than those other two have in their matches this season.
Yeah, and whoever thought that Morel would make a great centre-back with his size and how he defended as a left-back. But I agree, Kenny Tete was absolutely terrific. Other than that turn from Lo Celso, which in fairness he's probably still spinning from facing Neymar all game, but he was absolutely terrific. But a real standout performance, Peter, was the debut of former Amiens Tanguy Ndombele. He was effervescent, is maybe the right way to put it.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that he put the three of PSG in the shade, really, with how he performed. It looks like with Ndombele, it looks like a really, really good signing. I mean, what he's providing is definitely an upgrade on Dada, but it was the way he was able to move transitions for Lyon from defense to attack with the ball both at his feet and with his distribution. Obviously, in the 6th minute, he should have won a penalty, and why the referee hasn't given it, don't know. But he was excellent going back defensively, marshalling the midfield, going forward, his mobility. And I mean, this is a player that, I think Orlas came out and said, I've been watching him for a while, but he hasn't really been on the radar. I mean, he had a good season last year with Amiens. They got promoted. He's got a fair few assists and a goal. He's only just got his first French under-21 call-ups this season. But what a way to announce yourself in your debut at the Parc des Princes, to run the midfield like he did. And that thunderbolt of an effort was absolutely first class. Like, the technique on that strike it's difficult to teach. So it looks like Lyon have got a real gem on their hands, and he was outstanding. And there's plenty of videos going around of his performance and how well he did, and all of it is merited. And for someone so young, it bodes very, very well.
Yeah, I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but he kind of not in his performance or how he plays or anything like that, but the move from a smaller club where he had good performances, and I've watched him a few times before the move, and I thought he looked a very good player, but he maybe flew under the radar. It does remind me a little bit of that Thomas Lemar move we saw a few years ago when he was at Caen and wasn't really necessarily pulling up trees. We saw the move to Monaco, and some were like, is he good enough for that level? Is he really going to make that step up? And they absolutely blast it out of the water. He could be that kind of player that maybe just needed the platform to really become a top class, well, not world class player, because that's maybe pushing it a little bit too far, but reach that next level. And he does seem like an excellent buy. He was excellent with Toussaint. It's a great mix in that midfield. But I do want to pick on someone in that front four, Jez, he's disappointed me in the past, is maybe the nice way to put it, but he's continued to sort of frustrate, and that's Memphis Depay. I mean, Fekir was excellent again. Bertrand Traoré has great transition play, especially, and great pace, and added a lot to them. And Mariano Diaz has scored plenty of goals. He's a threat at all times, but is he maybe the weak link on that left-hand side in Depay, who's not really, he loses the ball fairly often. He doesn't tend to try and attack his fullback at all. He's always looking to come inside. Is that maybe somewhere where you look at someone like Cornet, who had good spells last season, maybe should be starting over him?
I mean, you'll have more insight than me as a United fan, but I've never been convinced about him. I don't know what the fuss is about. Okay, he scored that wonder goal last year, but for Lyon, but I've never thought he's anything other than average, maybe a tiny bit above average. I didn't find it a particularly exciting signing when Lyon brought him in, and nothing he's done so far has made me change my mind, I'm afraid. Cornet, he sort of divides the fans. He blows hot and cold. I've got a bit of a prejudice against him because of the way he left Metz, but at least, you know, even when he's doing something wrong, at least he's just trying something, taking risks, which, you know, half the time will work. You know, trying to get to the byline, cut the ball back. I think a better scoring record than Depay as well. I'd say, yeah, give him a go. I think I'd rather see him in the team than Depay.
Yeah. I do sometimes feel sorry for Memphis because he was excellent with the Dutch national team at that time where he broke through as well at PSV, but he just has seemed so one-dimensional. And I don't know if it was the move to Manchester United that sort of inflated his head, and that he never really tried to develop any more from there. But it's so frustrating to see a player that, again, we see this often enough anyway, that such talent and just not really fully realising it for one reason or another. But
to be honest, apart from the goal from the halfway line last year, I'm trying to think of another great Lyon moment, and the only one I can think of is the tweet he sent about lions eating fish before the Lorient match, and Lorient beat Lyon.
Yeah, I remember that one. I can't think of a winger in football that tends to try and do the same trick and then lose the ball as often as he does. And I still can't understand why Bruno Genesio went, oh, I'll not take him off first for Cornet. I'll bring off Diaz instead. That makes sense, but we'll never know, unfortunately. Let's head on now to another game and forget about Wolgrig, who, in fairness, many have really, because it's Radamel Falcao now who's on fire, and defences are rightfully terrified. 9 goals from 10 shots on target this season, Peter. Surely there can't be any question now from those that still call France a Farmers League and the rest of it, that the real El Tigre is back and back with a vengeance.
Yeah, no question. I mean, the predatory instincts are definitely back on show from Falcao. I think obviously his game is slightly adapted. I wouldn't say he's exactly the same explosive forward as he was before. He's become a lot more cute, a lot more intelligent with his movement. All of these attributes he had before, but these have been accentuated. And obviously, as you said, 9 goals from 10 shots is sensational. I think it's a new record, 9 goals from 6 match days, I think, in Ligue. And they've needed him as well. With the departure of Mbappe, the onus has fallen on someone else to take the limelight, essentially, and he stepped up to the mark. And of course, we could go back to this time last season and think, how on earth has this happened if we were at this point? And maybe it's familiar surroundings. Who knows? But I mean, last season he still netted 21 goals. Obviously, Mbappe's light probably overshadowed that a little bit, but he seems like he's raised his game again. He's taken on that mantle of being, the main outlet. I think Stevan Jovetic will be a good partner for him. Well, the one concern I would have is that I know that Jovetic, I don't see Jovetic as being a fast, pacey forward who can get in behind. That could, at some point, pull them up. And I don't think Falcao has the same pace since his knee injury. But, I mean, in the air, if we look at his goals that he's scored, he's scoring headers, really good at getting in the right place at the right time, and really good finishes as well. I mean, the second goal against Strasbourg at the weekend was excellent technique. He was gifted it by Monga, and he's having all sorts of problems. But I think it's definitely safe to say he's back to what we can say is near his best, a predatory El Tigre, I would say, with a slight adaptation to his new situ.
Yeah, and his link-up play with Jovetic was really interesting in that one. I thought they linked together really nicely, and he obviously sets up Ronnie Lopez's goal as well with an excellent little pass after a nice little quick run behind, and he's scoring all different types of goals. It's the classic poacher's goal just in front of the net. He had one disallowed, and like you mentioned, his second was good anticipation of the defender making a mistake and really, really punishing him with a fantastic finish. But Jez, after those loan spells in England where he was indifferent in Manchester United, we never really saw him at Chelsea at all. Did you ever see this recovery ever happening, even though obviously he's had to return to Monaco for it, which some see as a downgrade, but it felt like in those moments that it was the end of Falcao. Yes, can you hear me?
You cut out a little bit. I can now.
Yeah, sorry about that if I've cut out that moment. I was saying, did you ever see this coming from Falcao and returning to this kind of form?
No, I thought I agree with Peter. I think his peak was probably Atletico Madrid, and then even his half season at Monaco when he first arrived before the bad injury. I think his stats were kind of hiding not necessarily brilliant play, and then United and Chelsea he really looked like he was completely finished. It's probably wrong place at the wrong time as well, which didn't help, but he looked completely past it. Last year and even more so this year, he's looked absolutely fantastic. As you both said, not the same player, but using his experience so cleverly. In terms of his movement, his hold-up play, I'd even say captaincy. There's some captains who are sort of quiet, maybe lead by example rather than sort of any shouting or anything. He looks like he's sort of rousing the troops all the time. You can see him sort of geeing other players on, that kind of thing. Arguably a perfect kind of captain for what is always a very young team. I loved his assist for Lopez at the weekend, and as you said, although it came about from a big Strasbourg error, his finish for the second goal, just the way he just powered it past the keeper was great to see. And he looks like he's really enjoying himself. I always thought first season after the injury with United and Chelsea, part of it always felt like some kind of soul play. He was carrying this big injustice on his shoulders. It wasn't meant to be like this. I was meant to kind of have an easy season at Monaco, score 30 goals and then move to Real Madrid, and that never happened. And I think now he's sort of come to terms with where he's at in his career, realised that being at Monaco, no taxes, nice weather, all that kind of thing isn't so bad after all. He's got a league winners medal now as well, still playing Champions League. I think he probably realises he's actually really in quite a nice position and is sort of relishing the responsibility that he's got, as well as what is a fantastic goal scoring record so far.
Yeah, and I think the moment in that game as well that prompted me to chat about him this evening was it was very early on, really, and it was a chance he had in the first 5 minutes where they go down the wing and Sidibe plays a nice little sort of back heel pass to him, and because Falcao's running to the box but then taking a movement outside, and he really hammers one. It's a very good strike. He's just a little bit unlucky that he's lifted it a little bit too high because he's seen so many players in front of him. But at that moment, with that quick little bit of movement where everyone else was in the 6-yard box and he just drifted a little bit outside of it, was reminding me there, yes, that's the striker we know and love. Let's talk about Monaco's result a little bit, and let's touch on that, really. Peter, after a good draw in Leipzig, so they can take that, but a really humiliating defeat in the Côte d'Azur derby last week, it was important for them to get back on the horse in this one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very important for them to get back on the horse, as you say. So it was a good result midweek against Leipzig, who are a really good team. And, I think they were a little bit fortunate in that, obviously the second goal was offside. It's definitely a game-changing goal, the second goal. And the third is also a gift. So, I mean, the result is what matters, and they have bounced back well. They seem like I think we've discussed this endlessly about the additions they've made and how they've set up, and and against lesser teams like Strasbourg, it really allows them to play. You know, with George pushing down on the left side, he loves to do that, and Sidibe, it sort of masks his defensive naiveties. So when they're playing against the lesser teams, they do well, and they're very good at picking them apart, which we saw. I think Strasbourg might be a little disappointed. I think Ahulu missed a really good chance early on at the back post. And, you know, I think from their perspective, they've got to win their home games if they want to have any chance of staying up. I feel like they're not really a team that has the technical ability to outplay sides. When they beat Lille, that was all based on passion that they got from Le Mainau. So yeah, from their perspective, they want to do that, and obviously try and cut out the Mongan mistakes, which just seem to be endless at the moment, and they're really holding them back quite a bit. So, but yeah, I think for Monaco, it was important to get the 3 points, 3 goals, comfortable. It's a good confidence boost, and get back on track.
Just very quickly on Monaco, it's something that's always impressed me that sometimes is lost in the shuffle of them, and shuffle of a lot of big teams really, is the way they really take apart weaker teams in the league and make sure that they always seem to pick up the 3 points. It was especially apparent last season, and they've done it several times this season as well. Do you think that is what makes them such an excellent team, really, that you always say that these kind of games are give-me's, but Monaco always make sure that they get not just a result, but a good result in these kind of games?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a sort of a conscious thing. I don't know if it's Jardim saying, you know, there's no sort of shutting up shop once we got a 2-goal lead or whatever, you know, play to the 90th minute. Or last year, a lot of the time, it just felt like it was youthful exuberance. They were enjoying playing together, enjoying sort of setting each other up, scoring goals for fun, and so they just kept going and going, and you know, scoring 6-7 goals at a time. I think it's probably a good positive attitude to have going into more difficult matches as well, and certainly breeds a lot of confidence. You know, it feels a little this season so far that they're flattering to deceive, but all the stats are better than this time last season. But I'm not sure that they're playing as good football as they were at that time. And I think post Strasbourg match, Jardim pretty much said, you know, we've been relatively lucky with our fixtures so far. But the fact that they are, Nice aside, beating the teams that are put in front of them, that they're putting 6 past Marseille, whatever kind of Marseille it is, it's always a good thing to do. Means that, you know, as they're, again, the same as Lyon, having this big turnover and getting used to playing with each other, the important thing is that they're still getting those wins, and they're still breeding that confidence that's only going to sort of improve the spirit in the changing room, which you'd think will only speed up the process of them hopefully becoming the kind of team that they were last year, despite losing players like Silva and Mendy, Mbappe obviously as well.
Yeah, it's great to see them getting back to winning ways, and hopefully they might push PSG if some of the teams can take some points off them. Time to focus on a team we've not really mentioned too much to start this season, but Claudio Ranieri is really getting this Nantes team moving, if it's maybe a little bit slowly. They've won 3 of the last 4, keeping a clean sheet in all of those games as well, including a 0-0 draw with Lyon. Although, yeah, some will argue that the 3 goals in those games is a little bit of a sign of weakness. But Peter, is the Italian finally getting something out of this squad?
He's getting results out of the squad, yes. I mean, if we contrast it with last season and Conceição and that vibrant, explosive football, then we were looking at 2 very different sides. But he's going back to what he knows, and that's defending Italian. I mean, it's what Leicester's success was built on, and you can see where he's coming from. I mean, with Leicester, of course, it was built on having an excellent keeper in Schmeichel. And he's found one in Tatarusanu, who looks an absolute steal for about 2.5 million, I think, is the rumours in euros, which is quite striking. He's been up there with one of the best keepers so far this season, up there with Ruffier, I think you could put there as well. But But yeah, Tatarusanu has been excellent. You've got at Leicester. It was Hoof and Morgan, very straightforward centre halves. He's been relying on Palwai. Who's settled in very well since arriving from Bordeaux. Diego Carlos as well has filled in, as well as others, and they have a very strong defensive back line, and that's reflected by the clean sheets. And Dubois, a right back as well, another name that they've managed to keep hold of, and who many thought would depart, but he hasn't, and he's done well. But yeah, the issue lies in attack, and he hasn't found the right formula yet. And I think looking at that, there are a number of things we can discuss. I think Nkuma's exile is one of them. But I think when looking at how Nantes have done and how Ranieri has got them playing, I think Adrian Thomason actually came his comments recently saying that the forwards are having less fun, and I think that's reflective of how Ranieri has approached his job at Nantes. After the 3-0 drubbing at the hands of Lille, he's gone back to what he knows, and it's working. The next couple of games, they've got Strasbourg away, then Metz at home. They're also winnable. So I mean, he could be racking up a fair few points over the last month and into the next. So defending is where he started, and I think for goals it depends. I mean, last season it was Salah and Nkuma who were the main outlets for Conceição. So obviously Nkuma linked with a move away, rumours of tension with Ranieri, and he's slowly feeding him back. But he's not one to, as much as he's known as a tinkerer, he won't want to upset the apple cart too much, Ranieri. But Nkuma did come off the bench at the weekend, so potentially we could see him again. But whether he's going to change how he set up and go to 2 up top, I'm not so sure. But yeah, defending is where it's at.
Yeah, I think that might be a little bit too risky even now to put too many up front, especially with their defensive record. And like you mentioned, Tatarusanu has been absolutely sensational. What a great little buy that was. My question for you, Jez, really is they've started nicely and they've got a nice solid base there now with that defence and a decent enough in midfield. I know they lost Amin Harit, who started well in Germany as well, but Rongier is still a very good midfielder as well. Could a consistent goal scorer make this kind of team a European contender, possibly?
Possibly. I definitely think that the sort of defensive side is the strongest side at the moment. So, with those kind of foundations there, and the fact that they're going to be difficult to score against, as we've seen so far with their season, as long as you're not conceding, you only need to nick 1 goal or 3 goals all season so far to do okay. They've scored the same number of goals as Metz, but obviously when you look at the other end of the pitch, that's why they're sort of quite near the top, and Metz are still at the bottom. So in that sense, you have to say, well, a decent, reliable goal scorer, and the only way is up. I'm slightly cynical just because I think they've had, and as Pete said, the next 2 matches as well, they've had a spectacularly easy start to the season, really. Even the 2 matches they've lost, when you look at Lille and Marseille seasons so far, they're not necessarily in, looking back, they're not sort of noble defeats against decent teams or anything like that. They're kind of matches where they must think, well, looking at how other teams have played against them, maybe we should have got something out of that as well. So I think we need to wait until they start playing some stronger opposition to see what they're really made of. But if they can keep that tight defensive record and find someone who's going to score them 10, maybe 15 goals a season, then they could be outsiders for Europe. But at the moment, I'd say I still think there's a good 5 or 6 teams that are a lot better than them.
I think if they find a quick counter-attack style forward that can give them a little bit of a base there, they might creep up the table later on. But I agree with you. They've had a pretty soft schedule, and they've got a couple of games left before the international break that still seem pretty easy as well. So they at least will get the points on the board that will keep them safe, because I was really worried for them for the start of the season. But it does seem like they're starting to turn things around. Time for our...
It feels like all 3 goals that they've scored, I think, from memory, they've all been sort of fantastic individual efforts.
Yeah.
So it's not even like it feels that there's any kind of anything there sort of going forward as a team, which might be a concern as well.
Yeah, Giroto's was a very excellent strike from distance, and they've scored a few of those this season that are maybe a tad lucky or a tad thing. So they do. That while I mention a goal scorer, it's not just to keep them maybe pushing for Europe, but keep them going and ticking over as well. Time for our Ligue and snapshots really now, and I'll start with you, Jez, because I'm almost certain there's one that you've probably been waiting to say for the entirety of the
show. Yeah, I've got to go for Metz finally getting their first win of the season. I didn't think it would be this week. Angers have started the season very well. They've been unbeaten, not necessarily. I think they've only had one win, so in that sense, not too impressive. But they proved themselves very difficult to beat. So I certainly wasn't expecting to come away from there with 3 points, possibly 1 point if we got lucky, and then to get the 3 is a great bonus. Coming off the back of Monaco and PSG in 2 of the last 3 matches, where in both matches I think we've given a reasonable account of ourselves but come away with nothing, and the pressure was really on especially the coach Hinchberger, but the players as well. So I'm hoping that's a real fillip. They have to back it up with a win next week at home to Troyes. There's no point in sort of going away and getting points at Angers if you're going to muck up at home to one of the teams who, with the best will in the world, are definitely one of your sort of relegation rivals. But if they do get 6 points in those 2 matches, then I feel that they should be able to kick on. I certainly don't expect them to be. They're certainly not going to be challenging for Europe, but I do think that they should have the players to keep them up. But I think a lot of it is down to the coach and to whether Roux and Riviere can somehow muster enough goals between them to keep them out of the relegation zone.
Yeah, maybe. I'm starting to feel maybe they're trying to prove me wrong at the moment, those 2, with a goal in a game each for them. So let's hope that they, at least for your sake and your sanity, Jez, they can try and continue that. Peter, what's your snapshot this week?
I do love your optimism, Jez. I can't believe we just heard Metz and Europe in the same sentence. My snapshot comes from the Derby de la Garonne, the great and the bad. So first up, Malcolm. There's a great piece on the Get French Football News website, which talks about Malcolm. It's also on The Guardian. And he has been excellent this season. And again, he was the difference against Toulouse. A wonderful goal. Was a constant threat in the Toulouse back line. And I just wonder, I mean, his goal was excellent, but it's still not the best he scored. Obviously, they scored that sensational equaliser against Lyon. And I just wonder if Malcolm's the man to catapult them to Champions League contention. And then the bad from that game comes from Andy Delort for his free kick. It is definitely worth seeing. It is absolutely horrendous. Do give it a Google.
Yeah, what I also loved about Malcolm in that game is that I love his little moments where he tries to assert his authority. In that moment where Depraville was put through and there was a chance to square it back to him, and he is in the goal mouth and absolutely going spare. He is not a happy chappy, but just as Depraville wanted to score his first goal, don't take that away from him. My Ligue snapshots, I always like a few, and I picked out some nice funny moments that I enjoyed this weekend. One from the Monaco game, Daniel Subasic was not on the field for this one. It was Benaglio in net, so he was in the stands, but he did come down at the end to help take some photos. So there's some on the Monaco gallery of the Croatian testing his potential future job after he hangs up his gloves. They're not the best of photos, I might say, but he gave it a go. The other one is from the Rennes-Nice game, and one of my favourite moments of pinball I've seen so far this season. It involved an Alassane player and the Rennes goalkeepers. It comes in, player kind of hits it. It hits Ben Sebaini, who sometimes keeps it in, player flicks it up a little bit. The goalkeeper punches it, it hits player in the face, and it goes away. It's a wonderful moment where you're thinking the striker's missed a relatively decent chance there. The defenders kept it in play. The goalkeeper's trying to do something with it, and it eventually ends up nowhere. But just to finish on, really,
I thought it had come off the post. And it's only in the replay that I saw that he hit it back into player's face, basically.
It absolutely cannons off him, doesn't it? As well, I'm surprised he was standing. Really, credit to him, because it was the commentator as well was determined that it was the post for a moment, but the replay did show it cannoned off the Frenchman's face, and very quickly as well. I do want to mention again, unfortunately, Lille, who were really put to the post by Gangomp again, and it did take an absolute wonder strike from Dido to put them away, but they really should have had the game signed, sealed, and delivered before that. They're facing Monaco on Friday, so if you want to batter down the Hessians, if you live in Lille or if you're a Lille fan, I would prepare maybe for the worst, because if Monaco turn up and play how they can play, and Lille play like they did at the weekend, they are in for one hell of a drubbing, possibly. And that might signal the end of Bielsa as well. He might think, well, that's him enough. And I saw you link a piece earlier, Jez, as well on him, and then maybe indulging him a little bit too much. And sometimes the fear with El Loco, isn't it, that if you take a little bit too much of his advice on board, as much of his disciples will probably mention as well, you may go crazy yourselves. And it seems like it might be heading that way again for Lille, because they're just above that drop zone at the moment. And the way things are going, with a difficult game like that and a couple of difficult games to come, I don't think he's going to stick around. I think he's about to go AWOL, is maybe the way to kindly put it, maybe for someone who's had his moments in his career, shall we say. Time for some viewers' questions now. We've got a couple on the pipeline, and we'll start for this one from Connor Ketley, and I'll send it to you first, Jez. Has Rudy Garcia shown that he can be the right man for Lyon now, with his tactical changes at the weekend, where he played Payet as more of a number 10, which was the fans were asking for, and tried a couple of different things with Ng up front?
I think he's proved in the past. I know that he's got his detractors, and certainly it didn't end brilliantly at Roma, for example. But he's proven in the past that he is a good canny manager, and I definitely think he deserves a bit more time. I'm not convinced that the problem is him. I think the problem is the players he's got to work with. I don't, despite quite a lot of fuss at times over some of the signings that Marseille have made, generally I don't think they've been particularly impressive. I'd say more than any kind of tactical changes, the biggest difference this weekend was that Luis Gustavo was back and showed a bit of calmness and leadership in the centre. And I know it's one of my bugbears, but I'd say another big difference is that Evra wasn't on the pitch, which helps a lot as well, I think, if you're trying to keep a clean sheet. I think Garcia there'll be a little mistake, but I think he'll do as well as he can with what he's got to work with. But I don't think Payet is the player that he was. I don't think Mandanda is the player that he was. I think that's another telling thing. 2 clean sheets with Pele in goal. I think after the season he had last year, it was very harsh that he was benched, even though I understand why Mandanda comes back and goes straight in the first team. I think a couple of moves like that, like Mandanda, like Evra even, I wonder if there's a little bit more sort of politics, and it's more than just picking the best players to do a job for you. But if he's given free rein, I think he should. I think he is the right man. The only decision that I just constantly can't fathom is why he's letting Ocampos anywhere near the first team squad. But other than that, I have faith in him to do a reasonable job. I just think, as usual, he's working with expectations of fans who are still a little deluded in what they think Marseille are capable of achieving right now.
Yeah, I think I mentioned last week I want to get in touch with Ocampos's agent because I want him to manage my life, because what he's done with the Argentinian since he's left Monaco is minor miracles. If that another question here from Arian H, and I'll lend this one to you, Peter. Do you think that PSG should start playing some more of their players in their best positions rather than trying to shove their players into a system that they're not used to? For example, Mbappe maybe playing as a central striker in maybe a 4-4-2, or and like Draxler maybe playing as a left winger if he's going to start.
Right back.
Yeah.
We could do, but we'll end up with 4 left wingers. So I mean, it's a difficult one for Emery. Yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of things to balance. He's got, I think, one of the things we're touching on in the pod tonight was egos, and I think that's potentially why Lo Celso is given the opportunities. Potentially, maybe it's easier for Emery to have a player like that who's not going to cause him any issues. But it's very, very difficult for him. He's balancing a number of interests. He's got to play Mbappe, Neymar, and another one of the plethora of talent. Is Mbappe? I think Mbappe can work as a central forward, 4-4-2 with Cavani potentially. But what do you do with Neymar? And then it's a very difficult one. The simple answer is no. He can't. He can't play every player where they want to play because it's quite simply they have too many, especially in attacking positions. Defensively, there's no issue, of course. So, but yeah, it's not that he probably wouldn't prefer to. It's just that it's just not possible. I don't think, unless he's looking at very abstract formations and whatever else.
It might bamboozle them if they played 4 left wingers. That'd be
you never know. It could be a new innovation.
Yeah. Final question from Mitch Money 1B, and it's to both of you really, and I'll give an answer as well. Outside of the top 3 or 4 teams, which player do you think will become future stars? We'll probably get this question more often than not with players like Ousmane Dembele in the past at Rennes, and although he was at Monaco, obviously Mbappe being another one who's really shot to stardom. But who do you fancy to maybe take that next step in the next year or so, Jez?
We set outside the top 4, presumably we're counting Lyon, Monaco in the top 4.
Yeah. So it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's literally dozens of them because France is so good at bringing these players through. I suppose it's hard to look past a couple at Rennes. Joris Gnagnon at centre back, I think, is going to be very big wherever he goes. And I still think that Ismail Assar is a really great talent who can go on to bigger and better things as well. Who else? I have to have a think.
Peter, do you want to inject with one while we give just some time to think?
Yeah, I would add to the Rennes contingent with Faitou Moassa. I think he's been excellent since he's joined. He's been played all over the place by Gourcuff. Obviously, last season at Nancy, he was mainly left back / left wing, but he played on the right and he's played on the left, and he's looked very good. So I'd add him to that list. I hate these questions about potential because there, as Jess says, there's so many.
Potential is always potential, is that what I always say?
I'll go curveball because I keep my eye on Strasbourg a fair bit, and I've quite liked Isan Sako. He's played a few more games. I think there's something there. Obviously, it's very difficult in a side that technically isn't as strong. I think he could probably push a little higher. I wouldn't say he could be a world beater, but from what I've seen, he's got pace. He's technically quite good. Got good technique as well. I think he smashed the crossbar against Guingamp from about 40 yards. It was a sensational hit. But yeah, I'll throw his name in the hat as well while I try and think of others.
Jess?
I'm gonna mention one more. Not necessarily a future star, but in terms of a player who I think would be probably a bargain for any Premier League team and think would do a fantastic job. I'd suggest that outside Jan Jouf would always be my favourite, is possibly the most underrated player in the whole league at the moment, is Arnaud Souquet at Nice. I think he's a fantastic fullback, really good attacking as well. I think was it midweek or last weekend, one of the goals that he made was a sort of slalom run through the centre of midfield, which right backs are not supposed to be doing, or even capable of doing. They're sort of the drummers of the team usually. I think he could slot into any team, even the top teams in the Premier League, and do a very good job.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how he filled in for Pereira last year's season. He was a superb right back himself, but they didn't really miss a beat when Suke was playing there, really. I've got 4 names I want to mention. I'll start with a very obvious one of Malcolm, which everyone seems to mention at the moment. He's going to be a very good player, and he's showing that at Bordeaux at the moment. And then I've always got 3 names that I always think about, and I do like my defenders, so they're all at least in the back 5, and that's, I think Alban Lafont will be a sensational footballer. He's got great shot staving ability. I think if he adds a little bit more bulk, much like David De Gea did in the past, and he's a little bit better at claiming crosses, he could be top 5 in the world, I think, in 2 or 3 years' time. I love Issa Diop as well at Toulouse. I think he's a terrific defender. He's got a little bit of everything. He has an excellent partnership with Julien, and I think he's going to make some sort of step up next season. I think there's no doubt about that. And another player I've mentioned a couple of weeks ago as well, although he let me down a couple of weeks ago with this very silly handball, but René Pierre-Gabriel at Saint-Etienne is a fantastic right back who does a little bit of everything, which is what I love. He's a good going forward. He's much better than a lot of young right backs are at going backwards as well, which is much rarer to see, I think, which is why you should really be focusing a little bit more on him, because that's such a much more difficult thing to teach a young footballer to defend than it is to attack. And him having that already in his locker is going to stand him in good stead, as well as being able to play left back. So potential that he might, if he reaches the French team, he can help fill any of those gaps that have been real problem positions for France in the past. I think we'll finish there. That's all we have time for this evening. My thanks to Jez, Peter, and everyone listening at home. Join us for the preview show on Thursday, and the main show will be back here at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt and goodbye.